Welcome to the Greener Way podcast, a show about people, planet, and purpose, and how investors and corporate leaders push forward in a complex world. Joining us today is Amarjot Bagga, Head of Environmental and Social Impact at Iress, a financial services software provider. Amarjot is an experienced sustainability professional and part of FS Sustainability's inaugural ESG Power50 list, representing one of the 50 most influential sustainability professionals at ASX-listed companies. Amarjot, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Greener Way. Can you please introduce yourself and your role at Iress?
Hi, Rachel. Lovely to be here, and thank you for having me and enduring my voice. My role at Iress as a global financial services organisation is Head of Environmental and Social Impact. My remit is across ESG, and the purpose of my role is to create genuine impact for both people and planet.
Fantastic. So how do you go about doing that in a practical way in terms of setting a sustainability strategy at a company and then embedding it?
Yeah, I think it all starts with practical steps. There's, we sustainability professionals have a bit of a toolkit, and when we first start with an organisation, formally it's called materiality, but I think informally we want to get a gauge on the most important issues for our business. So we set about doing that through interviews, through surveys, just getting a context of the landscape. So looking at what our peers are doing, benchmarking, and also looking at where the organisation is strategically as well. I think that's an important facet. And then one of the most important elements is leadership alignment. So you need that support. So hopefully if the role exists, then that process has already been, undertaken. The business case for sustainability has been made. And so leadership alignment, and then finding out what all of your stakeholders, your clients, your investors, for a public company especially, your suppliers, industry partners, charities, whatever it might be that you deem important from a material stakeholder perspective, you get their perspectives and their views. And from there, you create important focus areas for your strategy.
So what does that mean, particularly at Iress? What are the material issues at Iress, and how have you linked those material issues, both financial and sustainability, to the business case?
Absolutely. So for us, financial services and technology at the clients are important for us. Climate change is a material issue for all businesses. Human rights are important. Supplier management, customer service, and management of data, information security, they're some of our top material issues. So we set about evaluating what our risks are in those areas, and then we create and map opportunities. So from a strategic perspective as well, that is what the business is looking at. And so we match sustainability strategy amongst that.
So what are your climate change risks? Let's take that in turn.
Yeah, so we consume a lot of resource at data centers. The technology has to be hosted somewhere. We have office buildings and we're emitting a lot of emissions. As a business, we have travel, we have work from home in scope 3. So scope 1, 2, and 3, all of those scopes are just as important. It used to be that you look at your scope 1 and your 2 and you create strategies to mitigate them. But, more and more we're seeing that scope 3 is even more significant because that's where all of your emissions are. And I think it's really important for a technology business, especially to account data center consumption as a material emission.
So let's just be really clear about that. So scope 3, your scope 3 emissions would be mostly in those data centers,
Correct.
i.e. the way your customers are using the software and loading their data on data centers. How do you attack a problem like that?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think firstly it comes with measurement. It's not just our customers using that data, it's our own data that's hosted on those platforms. I think once you have measurement, you then can set a baseline for saying, well, this is the line in the sand and then you set about doing science-based targets, which is the gold standard best practice approach in reduction. But you can't just set targets. You've also got to have a pathway to mitigate those emissions as well. So how do you mitigate data center emissions? Well, it's sort of an easy question to solve, but renewable energy is a big one. Water intensity and usage. So, data centers need a lot of cooling. Using supplier, I think it's a supplier partnership in using the most efficient resources to service those needs.
Nerd out on those details, Amarjot. We love this here at The Greener Way. And then human rights. What would be a human rights exposure for a software provider like Iress, and how do you attack that and sort of bring positive solutions?
Yeah, so we have nearly 1,600 suppliers, and out of those, we use anything from equipment, the manufacturing of software equipment. We know is a high risk human rights issue, from the way the materials are sourced to how production occurs, and using big name computers isn't where the danger lays. It's further down in the supply chain. So I think human rights considerations are further down the supply chain. It's about conducting risk scans, which then inform the high-risk categories and areas, which then you can further do a risk assessment on. So we're at that stage where we have done a risk scan and identified 5 key areas. So anywhere from, like I said, software and technology equipment to facilities, high-risk areas with migrant populations, such as facilities needs, such as cleaning, security, catering, and looking further into a deeper dive. And that's what, one of the ethos of the modern slavery legislation is: due diligence, due diligence, due diligence.
It's interesting, Amarjot, because we often look at human rights as a risk, but can there be a positive impact? I think I've heard you speak very passionately before about some very interesting projects that you've implemented at Iress to solve 4 problems in a positive way.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good way to look at the human rights lens, because it's often we're talking about modern slavery and some of the detrimental impacts of that. But a program I inherited at Iress was our partnership with Talent Beyond Boundaries, which is a global mobility of refugee employment not-for-profit, and they've done incredible work in creating talent access. We've got 6 employees through Talent Beyond Boundaries. And so that partnership with Talent Beyond Boundaries means that, we talk about diversity and D&I. Our colleagues from Talent Beyond Boundaries, we were able to look at them and able to interview them and put them through the process against any talent we would anywhere in the world. And that's been such an incredible program that we've been able to impact and, a new lease on life and livelihoods and families have been moved, not just individuals. So that's an incredible initiative to be a part of at Iress. And beyond that, we're always looking at refugee employment. So we've just done a scholarship for user experience design, and that came out of introduction we did at with the River Nile School in Melbourne, and we found 2 wonderful candidates that wanted to explore a alternative career path, and they were introduced to Iress through a partnership, and we've been able to successfully mentor some wonderful women experience technology, employment in technology.
Fantastic. And I love hearing about the ways in which people are looking at ESG, not just as a risk mitigation strategy, but as, levers and tools for positive impact. So speaking of that, once you start a program, Amarjot, how do you then measure success or potentially, failure? And how do you benchmark progress?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have some metrics in place, whether they be targets when it comes to Science-Based Targets Initiative for emissions. But when it comes to social, I think we like to not put quotas in place, but when we are doing a program such as with Talent Beyond Boundaries, we do want to get some numbers in place to see how many colleagues we'd like to see through the program. That then helps us communicate that to all of the stakeholders involved. And, for reporting as well, I think it's amazing to be able to exceed those numbers in some instances, but keep the numbers down when it comes to emissions. So I think we have to have the numbers in place to know, as a measure of success, and same as modern slavery, how do you measure effectiveness as well? You want to make sure that whilst you're doing all those risk scans and the due diligence, that the incidences or any opportunity to get there before that is as low as possible.
Excellent. So how do you then present those findings to your various stakeholders, whether it's your employees internally, your shareholders, your business partners? Does building that narrative around those metrics, how does that happen?
Yeah, I heard one of the speakers at Edge Impact say that sustainability is all about strategy, science, and storytelling, and I loved that.
Oh, gosh, me too. Actually, I think I'm going to steal that.
I think it's really important, that storytelling. It's not about, fluffy messaging. I think storytelling is more than that. I think it's about creating engagement and buy-in with all of your stakeholders. So we have governance set up internally to report to our people, to our leaders, to our board, and then obviously formally to investors through the ESG report annually. But we're doing a lot of engagement throughout the year as well, whether it's opportunities like this, or whether it's website, or any sort of opportunity to talk about that. I think again, it's about creating that story.
How do you make a sustainability strategy integral to the financial performance of a company, Amarjot, and not a nice to have? We often talk about volunteer days and volunteer hours. That makes everybody feel great. But do things like that actually add anything to company performance?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. And I think it's about the business case for sustainability. So what is that? It's what we spoke about earlier is, I think, having those defined impacts initially. And an impact, as we know, is very difficult to measure, whether it's environmental impact or social. Environmental we can say, is a little bit easier from an emissions perspective. But I mean, emissions aren't an environmental impact, right? It's just mitigation. So I think you really need to agree on, as an organization, and you need to do that with leadership when you're doing those material conversations at the beginning of the strategy, is what does success look like? And I think that's one way of integrating into strategy. So for example, having a really good sense of things such as property, what are some of the facilities plans, and what are the conversations that are being happening. I'm really lucky that that team is really engaged at Iress, that they know that when we are having a consolidation of property, or when we're looking for new sites, we know there's a sustainability lens. So I would say that one of my key measures of success is to assess if there is sustainability integration in the business, is if those colleagues are asking those questions, and not just me or the sustainability department. And like I said, at Iress, I see a lot more of that since we've started working on our ESG strategy. And then I think what else is important is going beyond, volunteering and having a nice day, is working in partnership. If there are SDGs, that are sustainable development goals, that you have identified, that are material that you can have an impact to positively, I think it's really important to put some of those metrics in place and use that as a gauge, then a nice volunteering day. So, whatever sustainable development goals that your organization has an affinity or an impact on, there's, the UN gives you some pretty good indicators of what success looks like in those. And for us, our sustainable development goals that we focus on through our Iress Impact Foundation work is SDG 4, which is quality education. Being a tech business, we think we have a material impact there. And not just in engaging women in tech, but also when we look at strategies such as e-waste, we wanted to engage a supplier that could then repurpose some of our tech equipment. And now we work with Lighthouse in Australia, and they donate some of our, still good condition laptops and computers regional and rural communities across Australia, Papua New Guinea. And then across other regions, we look at exploring something similar as well.
Look, what rings through really strongly through this conversation, Amarjot, is that you're very passionate about what you do and leveraging the pathways within Iress to achieve sustainable, positive social and environmental outcomes. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I was born in India, which was a developing country then, isn't so much now. And my family migrated to Australia when I was quite young, and I watched my parents work hard labor jobs, and they worked 6 to 7 days a week so we could have an amazing education. But through all of that, we always had a sense of community. So whether it be volunteering or any type of environmental work. And then when I studied and wanted to have a professional career, I knew I couldn't just have a corporate job. And CSR was very popular 15 years ago. So I fell into a role into forestry and exposure to something called carbon, and that really changed the course of my life. And then through that, I had exposure to humanitarian work, working in hunger relief overseas, and then prevention of trafficking in Cambodia. And it's an incredible world. But even when we've gone back to India, I think it's not about being, volunteerism is really dangerous as well. So I'm not encouraging that. But I think that exposure to developing countries and some of the issues and international development work that I've seen, I don't think I couldn't lay at night satisfied with any other role than some way, in some small shape or format, contributing to the world. And I know that all of the sacrifices my parents have made as migrants, I hope that I can live a life that's true to that and contribute to the community.
Excellent. Well, to shoehorn in my favorite Hamilton line, immigrants, we get the job done. And with that, Amarjot Bagga, the head of environmental and social impact at Iress, thank you so much for coming and sharing your views on the greener way.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for, again, tolerating the voice.
Thanks for listening to the Greener Way podcast. If you liked today's show, remember to rate and review us on your podcast platform and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Any feedback? Contact us on podcast@fssustainability.com.au. I'm Rachel Allen-Backus.
The Greener Way podcast is a product of FS Sustainability, a show about people, the planet, and investing in our collective future. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The Greener Way podcast gives listeners access to information and educational content provided by discussing numerous financial sustainable options and our featured guests. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of The Greener Way are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. FS Sustainability operates under an Australian Financial Service Licence and the exemption made available under the Corporations Act 2001 in respect to any information or advice given. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the FS Sustainability website, fssustainability.com.au.